My dad is almost more of a feeling than a memory, if that makes sense. Like the memories that I have of him are so incredibly vague, but they're there.
At 22, Robert Irwin appears in public as a younger version of Steve Irwin. He works with animals every day, hosts shows, and helps run Australia's zoo. People see strength and confidence in him, so much so that they almost forget he is the little boy who lost his father at just 2 years old. He has no clear memories of his dad. He doesn't remember his voice, their conversations, or the warmth of his father's embrace. In a recent conversation with Anderson Cooper, Robert shared that he still feels his father with him every day, not through memory, but through the work he does, the things his father left behind, and the moments that make him believe his dad never truly left. The tragedy and the memories, captured on film. On September 4th, 2006, Steve Irwin was filming Ocean's Deadliest off the coast of Queensland, Australia. The scene took place in shallow water. A stingray was swimming below him. According to official reports and later transcripts, the animal reacted suddenly when approached from above. In a matter of seconds, it struck multiple times with its tail. One barb pierced straight through Steve's chest. The wound hit his heart. The crew pulled him onto the boat immediately. They tried to help, but everything happened too fast. There was no time to save him. The accident was sudden. No warning, no second chance. At that moment, Robert Irwin was just 2 years old. At that age, memory doesn't fully form. Robert grew up without clear, direct memories of his father. He can't recall conversations. He can't picture specific moments and say, "I remember this." What he has instead is something harder to explain. He calls it a feeling, not a memory, just a sense that he was once loved deeply, even if he can't fully access it. What makes his story different is this: even without memory, he has evidence. The Irwin family filmed everything. From the moment Robert was born, cameras were there. Steve himself recorded inside the delivery room. He spoke to his son from the very beginning. These weren't staged moments, no script, just real life being captured. For Robert, this became what he calls the greatest gift. He may not remember, but he can watch. He can see how his father held him, talked to him, smiled at him. Those recordings became the only way he could understand what their relationship looked like. One moment stands out more than most: the well-known moose jacket clip. In that video, Robert is about 2 years old. Steve Irwin is wearing a jacket with a moose on it, playing with his son. On the surface, it's a simple moment, but for Robert, it does something deeper. He doesn't remember living it, but when he watches it, something comes back. He describes it as a wave of warmth and safety, not because he recalls the moment, but because his body reacts as if it once knew it. That's the difference between memory and feeling, compared to his sister, Bindi Irwin. The experience is completely different. Bindi was 8 when their father died. She has clear memories: his voice, their conversations, the time they spent together. For her, the loss was sharp, immediate, like a clean cut. For Robert, it wasn't like that. He didn't lose specific memories. Instead, he grew up with a different kind of fear. The fear that even that feeling might disappear one day. Not losing something concrete, but losing the last trace of connection. He once described it as being like a suffocating blanket. Not sudden, not sharp, but always there. That's why those videos matter so much. They're not just memories, they're proof. Proof that the connection existed. Proof that the feeling is real. For Robert, his father doesn't live in memory. He lives in what was captured. and in the way those images can still make him feel loved, even nearly 2 decades later. Terry's role, the one who kept Steve alive at home. After September 2006, Terry Irwin made a deliberate choice about how her children would grow up. Steve Irwin would remain a daily presence, not a distant memory. She did not avoid his name or soften his absence. Instead, she built routines that kept him visible, familiar, and part of everyday life. From the time Robert Irwin was around 3 until about 9, mornings often began with what the family called Daddy Docos, a steady rotation of Steve's footage that included fieldwork, television clips, and personal home videos. These were not occasional viewings tied to anniversaries or special moments. They were part of a consistent rhythm that allowed Robert to see, hear, and gradually recognize the man he could not remember. Through repetition, Steve's voice, energy, and personality became something Robert could identify with, even without direct memory. At the same time, Terry made herself fully available to every question her son asked about his father. Whether Robert wanted to know what Steve liked, how he spoke, or how he would react in certain situations, she answered clearly and patiently, never dismissing his curiosity or delaying the conversation. This openness ensured that Steve remained part of active dialogue within the home rather than becoming a figure frozen in the past. Beyond preserving memory, Terry demonstrated a way of living with grief that would shape Robert's emotional framework. She often expressed the belief that there is so much power and so much strength in vulnerability. And she practiced that belief in front of her children by allowing grief to exist openly rather than hiding it. In the years following 2006, she rebuilt both her family life and the future of Australia Zoo under constant public attention. Yet she did so without pretending that the loss was easy or resolved. For Robert, this became a model of how to face pain without avoiding it. As he learned not to suppress difficult emotions, but to sit with them and continue moving forward, Terry effectively gathered the fragments of a life that had been abruptly broken and reconstructed it with consistency and honesty, ensuring that Steve's presence remained integrated into daily life. As a result, Robert did not grow up feeling that he had to let go of his father in order to grow. Instead, he learned that it was possible to carry that connection with him, openly and without apology. The pain of absence and the process of facing it. After 2006, the absence of Steve Irwin was not abstract inside Australia Zoo. It was physical and constant, showing up in the small details of daily life that no one could replace. One of the clearest examples was the sound of his motorbike, which used to move through the zoo every day and signal that he was nearby, working, talking, alive. When that sound disappeared, the silence became something Robert Irwin could feel even as a child. At around 3 to 4 years old, Robert tried to respond to that absence in the only way he could understand. He took his father's tools and spent close to a year attempting to fix the motorbike. He did not have the skills or knowledge to repair it. But the action itself mattered more than the result, because it reflected a simple belief that if the bike worked again, something might come back with it. It was not about mechanics, it was about connection. As Robert grew older, the absence followed him into more defined life moments. One of the most significant came when Bindi Irwin got married. On that day, Robert walked his sister down the aisle, taking on a role that traditionally belonged to their father. He later admitted that his first internal reaction was direct and honest. "This isn't my job." The responsibility did not feel natural, and it highlighted what was missing. However, he chose to step into it anyway and reframed the moment as something meaningful rather than something unfair, treating it as a way to honor his father rather than replace him. During his teenage years, Robert's response to grief shifted in a different direction. There were periods when he would shut down emotionally, especially when his mother spoke about Steve. The stories that once helped him feel connected began to trigger a stronger awareness of loss, and instead of engaging, he would withdraw. This reaction was not dramatic or visible from the outside, but it marked a stage where the pain became harder to process and easier to avoid. The turning point came gradually, influenced by what he had observed from Terry Irwin and later reinforced through his own experiences, including his participation in Dancing with the Stars in 2025. Through that process, Robert began to move away from avoidance and toward a more direct approach, choosing to sit in it rather than push it aside. Instead of shutting down when emotions surfaced, he allowed himself to feel them fully and speak about them openly. This shift did not remove the pain, but it changed how he carried it. The absence of his father did not become smaller. It became something he could face without turning away. Over time, that ability allowed him to transform moments that once felt overwhelming into moments that held meaning, even when they remained difficult. The bridges that help. Robert feel his father. Every day for Robert Irwin. The connection to Steve Irwin is not something he remembers clearly, but something he rebuilds through real, physical parts of his daily life. Over time, certain objects, actions, and moments stopped being reminders of loss and became ways for him to feel close to his father again. One of the earliest and strongest connections was his father's motorbike. As a child, Robert learned to recognize the sound of it moving through Australia Zoo. And that sound meant one simple thing. His dad was nearby after Steve died. The motorbike stayed, but the meaning changed. It no longer brought comfort. It became a reminder that the sound was gone for good. Robert avoided it for years because it pointed directly to the absence he could not fix. That changed much later, around 2025 to 2026, when he decided to restore it completely and start riding it himself. Now, when he drives it around the zoo, the feeling is no longer about what is missing. It is about stepping into something familiar, something his father once did every day. And in those moments, he describes a clear shift in mindset, from loss to confidence, from silence to a sense that he is continuing the same path. The same pattern appears in the way he connects through his father's clothing and personal items. Steve's khaki shirts were never preserved as untouched memorabilia. When Robert found some of the originals, they were worn, torn, and marked by years of fieldwork, including scratches from animals and signs of use from places like East Timor. Instead of restoring them to look new, he chose to repair them only enough to wear, leaving every mark visible. For him, those details matter because they carry real history. He later wore one of these shirts during Dancing with the Stars in 2025, not as a costume, but as something grounding, something that connected him directly to his father in a moment where he felt exposed. A similar connection exists through the watch Steve wore on the day he died, which was later returned to the family by Philippe Cousteau after restoring it. Robert began wearing it regularly, turning it into part of his routine rather than something stored away. One moment stood out when he happened to run into Philippe Cousteau in a grocery store in Los Angeles on the exact day he had gone out to buy a new watch. There was no plan behind it, but the timing felt too precise to ignore. For Robert, it became one of those moments that felt like a quiet signal, something small, but meaningful enough to reinforce the sense that certain connections do not fully disappear. His time on Dancing with the Stars in 2025 marked a different kind of bridge, one that did not rely on objects, but on expression. During the show, he performed routines dedicated to both his father and his mother, Terry Irwin, and allowed himself to cry on live television. It was the first time he openly expressed that level of emotion in front of an audience, and he later described it as the moment he truly let everything out. Before that experience, speaking about his father often came with hesitation, as if emotion would interrupt his words. After it, something shifted. He could still feel the weight of it, but it no longer stopped him from talking. Outside of public life, Robert often says he feels closest to his father when he is working in the field, far from cameras, leading conservation work in remote areas. In 2026, one moment stood out clearly when he helped capture a 16-foot crocodile in the same region where his father had worked decades earlier. When the team checked the animal, they found it had been tagged by Steve exactly 20 years before, in the same location. The connection between time, place, and action was immediate. Robert became emotional, not because of the catch itself, but because of what it represented. To him, it felt like confirmation that he was continuing the exact path his father had started. That same idea carries into the Crocodile Hunter Lodge, a project developed in 2026 that reflects a vision Steve once had. Robert approached the design with intention, placing specific elements, including trees and personal items, in ways that serve as quiet tributes. The lodge is not just a new development, it is a continuation of something unfinished, turned into something real. Across all of these experiences, the pattern remains consistent. Robert does not rely on memory to feel connected to his father. Instead, he builds that connection through what he can touch, wear, fix, carry, and do, over time. These small, repeated actions have replaced the emptiness with something more stable. The absence has not disappeared, but it has been reshaped into something he can live with, something that allows him, in very real ways, to feel that his father is still part of his life. Healing, from the wound to the gift. At a certain point, Robert Irwin stopped trying to get past the loss of Steve Irwin and began to understand what it was doing to him. One idea helped him put that shift into words, a line he often references from Andrew Garfield: "The wound is the only route to the gift." For Robert, that was not a comforting quote at first. It was a difficult one, because it meant the pain was not something to remove, but something to go through. That understanding connects directly to how he was raised by Terry Irwin, who consistently showed that vulnerability is not weakness, but a form of strength. As a child, Robert saw that grief was allowed to exist in the open. And, as he got older, he had to decide whether to follow that example or avoid it. For a period of time, he chose avoidance, especially during his teenage years when talking about his father felt overwhelming. But that approach did not make the feelings smaller. It only made it harder to process. The real change came when he began to practice what his mother had modeled, which meant allowing himself to feel everything without trying to control it. His experience on Dancing with the Stars in 2025 became a turning point because it forced him to express that emotion publicly rather than manage it privately. When he cried on live television, it was not planned as a moment of impact, it was simply the result of no longer holding things back. After that, something shifted in a practical way. He noticed that, when he spoke about his father, his voice no longer caught in the same way. The emotion was still there, but it moved with him instead of stopping him. Over time, his understanding of grief changed. Instead of something that consumes you completely, something that takes over and leaves no space, it became something that exists alongside you. He has described this difference clearly. Grief does not disappear, but it can change position. It can move from something that swallows you to something that walks beside you. That shift does not reduce the importance of the loss, but it makes it possible to keep moving without feeling overwhelmed at every step. Along with that change came a stronger sense of gratitude, which may be the most defining part of his healing process. Rather than focusing only on what he lost, Robert began to focus on what he had, even if it was for a short time. He has said directly that he considers himself lucky, not because he avoided loss, but because he had a father worth missing. The time was brief, just 2 years, but in his view, that does not reduce its value. That perspective does not erase the pain, but it reframes it. The loss remains, but it exists alongside something else. The recognition that those 2 years were meaningful enough to shape the rest of his life. In that sense, the wound never fully closes. It stays present. But instead of being only a source of pain, it also becomes the place where purpose, connection, and gratitude continue to grow.